transition cost and transition problems, but in the end, it's going to be a beautiful thing.
He is destroying the credibility of the United States as a leader in the world when it comes to the value of the dollar.
I told you not to doubt us. The media always does. The Democrats always do.
This is just the beginning. And House Democrats are going to aggressively push back every day, every week.
NATO, I think it's the strongest it's ever been.
Really?
It is.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, it takes a village of volatility, or so it seems. Stocks tumble yet again. President Trump holds a cabinet meeting today as tariff reality that it can be discerned sets in. Stock market slides, all three major indices closing in the red, even as the White House says dozens of countries are apparently coming to the table to talk tariffs. And yet, trade tensions with China, they're only increasing. President Trump's reciprocal tariffs on the world's second largest economy now total 145%, though there are some exemptions. Beijing's retaliatory tariffs are also now in effect to the tune of about 84%. Today, President Trump acknowledged there will be what he calls transition problems.
We're in very good shape. We think we're doing very well. Again, there'll be a transition cost and transition problems, but in the end, it's going to be a beautiful thing.
I want to start tonight with Willie James Inman at the White House. Kelly O'Grady, my good friend in New York. Kelly, let me start with you because we've been doing this for so many days. And the volatility today was kind of remarkable, almost as remarkable as yesterday's were in the upward direction. At the one point today, the Dow was down, if I remember correctly, 2,100 points, closed about 1,000 points down. That seems to be a market still trying to wrestle with what all of this means.
That's right, Major. And I think you're going to see that market and the investors wrestle with this for a while. I will give you another stat to just put into context how volatile it was. At one point, the S&P 500 was down just about 6%. And that's important because when you hit 7%, it's called a circuit breaker. And trading across the indexes are halted for 15 minutes. So we got really close to that today. But what you're seeing, yesterday was a bit of a sugar high. I talked to a bunch of investors, and every single one of them told me they did not think that we had seen the bottom in the market, that there's still so much back and forth, and that today people were coming to terms, I think you said it right off the top, with the tariff reality, that we still have a 10% tariff on most nations. That's not nothing. And this trade war that seems to be developing with China is giving a lot of investors anxiety. What we saw happen with the bond market and the 10-year Treasury, also a lot of anxiety as investors just wonder, is the dollar going to remain strong? Is the economy going to remain strong?
Kelly, stand by. I want to talk to Willie on the North Lawn of the White House. What is the White House saying today about the future of these tariff talks?
Hey there, Major. Well, the president was asked about this earlier today. What happens in 90 days? And he essentially said that those tariffs would go back into place if the United States doesn't get what it wants in terms of those negotiations with their trading partners and nations around the world. Of course, let's remember that those retaliatory tariffs, some 125%, you add the 20% fentanyl tariffs, that brings it to 145% for those some of those goods coming from China. But the White House saying that they're negotiating here. Peter Navarro, the White House trade advisor, essentially says that this 90-day time period buys time for the U.S., including President Trump, to negotiate. And advisors indicated earlier today that Trump would be personally involved with those negotiations, especially when it comes to China.
Kelly, there's a conversation going on here in Washington. Some of it has a political aspect to it, but there is some of it that's going on in Wall Street that's just looking at the timeline of yesterday, because the president's announcement was preceded, about the pause, was preceded by a very sharp increase in stock buying. Walk us through what the timeline suggests or tells us.
Right. So the timeline is really all about the question of when President Trump put out this post that essentially said, I believe it was 9:37 exactly, it's a good time to buy. It's a good time to get in. And then a couple of hours later, not even 4, in the 1 o'clock hour was when he announced this 90-day pause. And so the accusation is that this may have been what we call market manipulation. So trying to get investors to respond in a specific way. Oftentimes you see it with a particular stock. Elon Musk has been accused of this in the past with Tesla. I will say I've talked to a few investors and analysts and folks at the SEC about this, or that were formerly at the SEC. They say he's been saying that the markets are okay for a while, even over the past week and a half, that it wasn't necessarily a change in tone, but a lot of people are suggesting it was, Major.
Willie, I want to play for you some sound from the top economic advisor of the White House, Kevin Hassett. Let's play that.
I don't think that I ever give stock advice about now, but I think every day is a good day to buy if you believe in the future of America, and every day is a good day to hold.
So, Willie, that's sort of a redirection of the question, not really going to the substance, which is, did anyone in the White House know this was going to happen? And did any of that information leak out in ways that could influence the way people purchased or made decisions on the stock market?
Yeah, that's the question here, Major. But the White House is trying to explain away this situation. Not only that sound you played there coming from the president's top economic advisor, but also a spokesperson gave us a statement, and he reiterated that the president is looking to reassure Americans in the economy. I want to read part of that statement for our viewers. He says, "It is the responsibility of the president of the United States to reassure the markets and Americans about their economic security in the face of nonstop media fear-mongering." And then that statement goes on to criticize Democrats. So the White House looking to not necessarily address the situation, but also sidestep it in a way that really doesn't explain what the president potentially did there or the situation itself, Major.
Kelly, that phrase has come up a lot in the last 24 hours from the White House, media fear-mongering. So let's take you out of it. Let's take me out of it. What has happened on the indices the year to date? They're all down. And they're down because it seems to me those who are making market decisions are on the net down, or at least buying the down and not buying the up.
Well, and it's interesting, actually. I'm glad that you put that into context of what's happened year to date, because let's just take the last week out of it. Prior to that, you look at the indices around the world that we track in Asia and Europe, and those markets were actually doing much better than the U.S. And I will highlight that there are a number of major banks, which, by the way, we're going to start to see reporting tomorrow. That's going to be an important moment for the market, that have talked about a slowdown in economic growth. So taking you and me out of it, you know, it's not just the fear-mongering. It is that we are hearing this from some of these major business leaders as well, that they're concerned.
And Kelly, again, taking you out of it, taking me out of it, there was very positive inflation news today that under normal circumstances, outside of this tariff conversation and the anxiety therein, probably would have sent the market in a more positive direction.
I am so glad you brought that up, Major, because I saw this morning and I was like, wow, we're going to have a great day in the markets. You're right. Normally, the fact that we saw 2.8% the month before, inflation went down to 2.4%, you would have seen investors celebrate, but they're not looking backwards, they're looking forwards. And what if and what might happen with tariffs?
Kelly O'Grady in New York. My thanks to you. Willie James Inman at the White House. Thanks to you also. We are following breaking news out of New York City. 6 people, including the pilot, are dead after a helicopter crashed into the Hudson River. 2 of the deceased are believed to be children. This was the scene earlier this afternoon. The cause of the crash, so far, unknown. The National Transportation Safety Board has been deployed to commence the investigation. We're going to continue to follow the latest developments and update you if any come in. Electric vehicle sales rose last month in the United States, but could President Trump's tariffs fuel a slowdown in those sales? And how about production? We don't know. We're going to find out a little bit more because we're going to take a deeper dive into EV sales and their future right here on America Decides. Welcome back. President Trump's tariffs, you've heard a little bit about them, right? Well, they could have an impact on electric vehicles production and sales. And the Zero Emission Transportation Association, well, it's been critical of the president's so-called trade war, arguing it creates economic uncertainty in the EV industry. I want to bring in its director, Albert Gore. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
So last year, EV sales in the United States, 1.3 million, up 8.1%. This first quarter of 2025, 300,000 EV sales. It's not blowing the doors off the market, but it is rising. What does this whole tariff conversation do to that market and do to the components necessary to keep it going?
Well, you know, tariffs have had an impact on the whole automotive market.
Sure.
No question about it. I think the EV industry has been a little less exposed, primarily because of the wave of investments that have taken place across the country over the last decade, but in particular over the last several years in response to some of the clear market signals in the Inflation Reduction Act.
Right. Now, the president has tried, meaning President Trump, has tried to reverse what he called an electric vehicle mandate. It wasn't. It was an emissions set of standards. How has that influenced this whole conversation and the market?
I think overall, there is an understanding that the EV industry, and that extends to the battery industry, the critical mineral production and refining, is a really fast-growing industry across the United States. Look at the battery belt states like Michigan, Kentucky, Ohio, Georgia, Tennessee. There are factories growing, producing vehicles, producing batteries. So it's a sector that is providing a lot of economic vitality across the country. And I think there's a strong recognition, particularly in Congress, that ought to continue to be supported.
But without the electric vehicle emission standards, or the emission standards that tend to benefit those in the renewable sphere of the energy economy, does that take away some of the incentives for people to move toward EVs and for the production lines to continue to expand?
You know, I think the past decade or so has been proof that there is really strong consumer demand for electric vehicles.
Regardless of the regulatory environment.
Independent of whether folks care about emissions or not, they're just good vehicles. And so I think that's why we've seen sustained growth. We've had over 1 million sales a year for several years in a row now. 14% of new vehicle sales in 2024 were plug-in electric vehicles. And, you know, there's a lot of room to grow. And that's a great thing for the people in communities like Savannah, Georgia, like Reno, Nevada, that have huge factories growing and producing quality jobs.
How does China fit into this entire equation?
Well, you know, China is a huge supplier across the entire American economy. And that's changing. But there are a few places where it's changed as quickly as in the EV and battery industry over the last several years. And a lot of that is because of the way the tax credits in the IRA are structured. So in the demand side credit, you have to get all the Chinese content out of the battery in a very short period of time. And that has created a huge wave of private sector investment from automakers into U.S. Mineral producers and refiners, battery component manufacturers. So to use Reno as an example, you have Panasonic making 6 million cells a day in their facility there. That has created huge demand for minerals and a huge supply of cells to EV manufacturers downstream. So, you know, the EV supply chain has made dramatic progress in moving the supply chain outside of China into the United States as much as possible. But there are still trade relationships with Japan, South Korea, and within the USMCA.
So part of your career intersected with Tesla. You worked there for 7 years, if I read your resume correctly. Tesla's sales are declining domestically and globally. They're still the dominant player in EVs in America. What's your evaluation of where Tesla finds itself in this marketplace?
Well, I think Tesla has, you know, essentially created an enormous market for electric vehicles in the United States. It still has the most American-made car in the market. And I think what that does for a country is crowd in other investment. You've got LG with 7 factories across the country, Samsung, SK. I mean, huge factories, huge investments because there's a competitive market for EVs, largely because of Tesla's impact over the last decade. So I think that, you know, it'll continue to grow, and mostly the market will continue to grow. The more people that have EVs can tell their friends, neighbors, family members what it's like, and you know, that's how the market grows organically.
And what's the future of charging and length of travel?
I think that we continue to see a lot of progress in energy density. So, you know, EVs at 400 and 500 miles of range. Most people, when they own an EV, they don't think about charging very much. They charge where they park. When they travel, you know, they're utilizing the fast charging network. We have a lot of work to do to build a national EV charging network. But in general, you know, good stuff on the horizon for range, for charging access, and that market grows as EV deployment grows.
Because most of them come with a charging station at home, oftentimes subsidized by the seller.
That's exactly right. And
Not that I'm doing a commercial or anything for you.
And a great thing for 7 million people working in the electricity supply industry across the country.
Albert Gore, great to have you in. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Overcoming concerns, House Republicans approve a budget blueprint for President Trump's overall economic agenda. So how did House Speaker Mike Johnson stamp out what appeared to be a kind of significant Republican revolt? We'll find out next from Capitol Hill, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The House narrowly passed a budget blueprint today that includes cuts to taxes and spending. It is a significant procedural step that Republicans hope will eventually lead to them, only them, we're not going to get much Democratic support, if any, pushing through President Trump's economic agenda. House Speaker Mike Johnson overcame a momentary conservative uprising to get this across the finish line. Let's listen.
There's a lot of work ahead of us, and we're really excited about that. In November, the American people delivered unified government to the Republican Party. They returned President Donald J. Trump to the White House. They gave us control of the House and the Senate, and we are going to make good by that.
Nicole Killian joins me now from Capitol Hill. A lot of work ahead. Nicole, outline it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is where lawmakers are going to have to roll up their sleeves here. A lot of people were asking the Speaker whether or not this was the easy part in terms of getting this resolution passed, which basically just outlines, guides the process, provides some legislative instructions for how they want to move forward in crafting this big, beautiful bill that the president wants, which will entail a border funding, which will include energy independence. Proposals will also deal with the issue of extending the president's tax cuts, potentially increase the debt limit as well. So there's a lot of legislative text that has to be written. And also, lawmakers have to find savings in order to be able to pay for this big, beautiful bill as well and not add to the deficit at the same time. So that is the work that is ahead for House and Senate Republicans, even as they prepare to recess. They're expected to meet over the break, the respective committees that have been charged with finding some of this savings and really start the legislative drafting process in earnest.
What kind of timeline are Republicans hoping to follow to get this done?
Well, the Speaker said he would like to get this cleared through Congress by the end of May. We're kind of aiming for Memorial Day. I think ideally that is when the House and Senate kind of hope to finalize this package, get it passed, get it to the president's desk. Certainly, that is an ambitious timetable in the sense that we are now nearing the middle of April. So that kind of roughly gives them a month and some change. So it's possible, certainly, that it could go beyond that. But for now, that is their target.
Nicole, as you well know, Republicans on both sides of the Capitol, Senate and House, are getting lots of questions about tariffs. Now that there's a pause, what are you hearing?
Yeah, well, interestingly, I asked Speaker Johnson about that today, in addition to him celebrating, of course, this budget resolution vote. But of course, as he was doing that, we were seeing the markets drop precipitously. And so I did ask him about that and whether or not the president should keep this tariff pause, whether he should scrap this tariff plan altogether. Take a listen to his response.
We're going to let him do that. I'm going to do my job over here. But I do hope and believe that the vote today is a very strong signal to the markets, to investors, job creators, entrepreneurs, the people that make the economy run, that the Congress is going to get us on sound footing. And you can count on that, and you can bet on it. And you ought to, I think today would be a great day to buy stock.
So the Speaker there encouraging people to buy stocks, but also at the same time deferring to the president on his next steps in terms of this tariff plan. Obviously, we know the president is going to continue these negotiations along with various members within his administration, but ultimately that could impact this big, beautiful bill that they want to pass here on Capitol Hill. So that is the message, at least for today, that the Speaker was trying to send, that at least on his end, they are moving forward in earnest.
And Nicole, as I listened to the last moments of the debate before the bill was voted on, the House budget resolution was voted on, lots of Democrats were outlining Medicaid. It seems to me to be one of the most important, if not the most important, fault lines in the conversation to come.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something, too, that we pressed the Speaker on and that I pressed House Majority Leader Steve Scalise on as well, because basically, in order to get the buy-in from some of these fiscal conservatives, you know, they really want to see some deep cuts, upwards of $1.5 trillion. You know, the Senate had set a floor of about $4 billion. That's a huge gap, right? $4 billion to $1.5 trillion. We did hear Leader Thune today stand with Speaker Johnson, saying that the Senate would be as aggressive as possible, understanding that the Speaker and House Republicans would like to see $1.5 trillion in cuts. But I asked Leader Scalise, you know, where are you going to find this savings and how do you recoup that savings without touching Medicaid? And so his response to me was, look, we're going to look at areas of waste, fraud, and abuse. Speaker also told reporters maybe it's an issue of looking at the issue of work requirements when it comes to Medicaid. But the message they're trying to send is that they don't want to tinker or tamper with benefits, but they certainly may take a look at some of the outer edges of the program, particularly if there are any evidence of wasteful spending.
How to define outer edges. Nicole Killian, thank you very much.
You bet.
Russian officials have released a Russian-American ballet dancer in a prisoner exchange arranged by the two countries' intelligence agencies. Ksenia Karolina was arrested and sentenced to 12 years in prison on treason charges earlier last year. Russian state media says she donated about $51, yes, $51 to an American-based humanitarian group that helped Ukrainians impacted by the war. In exchange for her release, the United States freed a German-Russian national who was arrested in August of 2023 on smuggling charges. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer's unexpected Oval Office invite, the meeting that's angered some Democrats and got her praise from, President Trump. Our political panel weighs in next on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Thanks for hanging out with us. It is rare, I think you'd acknowledge, for President Trump to praise a Democrat, especially in public. But during an Oval Office visit yesterday, he called Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer a, quote, very good person who has done a, quote, excellent job. Earlier in the day, though, the governor, that is State Governor Whitmer, wasn't so generous about the president's approach to tariffs.
I'm not against tariffs outright, but it is a blunt tool. You can't just pull out the tariff hammer to swing at every problem without a clear, defined end goal.
I want to bring in our political panel. Ophira Yeheskel is Director of External Affairs for the Democratic Governors Association. I'm glad to have you here. Kevin Sheridan, back again, but probably only after he heard about the tariff pause. Former spokesman for the Republican National Committee and once a senior advisor for the long-departed Romney-Ryan 2012 presidential campaign. Kevin, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Picking up on the pause.
Yeah.
How much do you think that factored into Republican calculations, specifically in the House, to get the budget resolution passed and know that they're going to have this breathing room where there's no tariff uncertainty while they deal with the hard realities of trying to write that bill?
Yeah, I don't know that the pause necessarily was the catalyst for it, passing the
Didn't
House
hurt, though.
today, but it doesn't hurt. It gives everybody a little bit of breathing room. It gives the stock market a little bit more confidence, although it went down again today a little bit.
Didn't look very confident today, especially when the Dow was down 2,100.
Yeah. So, look, Republicans are going to have to get this passed. I think this, as soon as possible. Their entire legislative agenda and his
but you know as well as I
agenda
do,
weighs on it.
They don't want to have to answer two hard questions at the same time, because there are going to be hard questions about the reconciliation bill, and they did want to deal with hard questions about tariffs and the volatility it was causing. They're going to be spared that for 90 days. That's got to be a relief to them.
Yeah, now they're in the let Trump cook phase, and let's see what he can come up with. I expect Bessent has now
the Treasury Secretary.
Yeah, he's at the center stage of all of this. They're going to have to start announcing some deals quickly, though, within the next couple of weeks.
The burden is something that they've themselves
put some more
have
confidence
created.
back in the markets.
Right.
Make it look like there really is a plan here.
Ophira, I want to ask you about Jared Polis, the Colorado Democratic governor, because he responded almost immediately to Gretchen Whitmer. Now, all of us in the political reporting world want to find little cage matches for 2028 as soon as we can. It's a small octagon, but it's one nonetheless, where the governor says, hey, tariffs are bad outright because they lead to higher prices and destroy American manufacturing. Do you imagine Democrats are going to start quarreling with themselves or try to focus all the attention on Trump?
I think where Democratic governors are united is doing what's right for the people of their states. So I think Governor Polis has an opinion, and so does Governor Whitmer. But I think they're all in alignment on the fact that Trump's across-the-board approach on tariffs has been disastrous for the American people. And they're the ones who are being hurt here at the grocery store, at the pump. And when we're talking about things like housing and affordability, these tariffs really put a huge impact and cost on that. And you're talking about a 90-day pause, but with Trump, anything can happen. And I think we could see that volatility would continue and that chaos could continue. And I think Democratic governors are the one with a real economic message. And they're the ones who are really fighting to make life more affordable for people in their states. So I think they share that.
Now, you know where the White House has been the last 3 days on this, saying, well, let's go back through some statements from Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, this Democrat, that Democrat, decrying trade imbalances with China. And the White House says they didn't do anything. Now Trump is, and suddenly Democrats are hassling us about that. How would you respond to that line of argumentation from the Trump White House?
I think there's certainly a way to be thoughtful about how we're engaging in trade. Nobody's arguing with that. But I think the way Trump is engaging here, creating a lot of uncertainty across the market, like we saw in the stock market, I think people really don't like that. And I know Major CBS ran a poll about this the other day, where voters said they'd rather be focused on lowering prices instead of engaging in these unilateral trade wars with people. And I think people really don't like that uncertainty, whether you're a business owner or you're just a person trying to support your family. When you go to the grocery store right now and you get less when you're spending more, I think that's something that Democrats have no problem messaging on.
Inflation's down.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, Kevin, because I was talking to Kelly O'Grady about this at the top of the program. Absent the volatility and the uncertainty around this trade conversation, the market would have been up, and very positively so probably today, because that inflation print was positive.
Yeah, I think he's signaling he's willing to be chaotic. This is always been part of his plan, a part of his negotiation style. He writes about it in his book. Mm-hmm. He throws a grenade, sees what everybody does and how they react, and then he starts negotiating. And that's what he's doing here. He can't take too much pain at the stock market for too long, or Republicans will start getting very nervous. But this is part of how he's always negotiated.
And to your point from a moment ago, I want you to carry it a little bit farther if you're willing to. The White House says all these folks are coming, beating down the doors to negotiate. If those deals don't look materially different from the things we already do with those countries, what's the political impact of that? Because if this is a national trade emergency, one would think that things would be negotiated fundamentally different. And the fundamentals are just at the margins. How does that land?
Well, I do suspect we'll get, with our trading partners, some better deals.
They're going to have to be materially different.
Open, some, being able to sell our beef around the world. And so we'll see. The big question is China. And how long can we go tit for tat on a tariff war with China? They buy a lot less from us than we buy from them, so you would think that we could probably last longer than they can.
Yes, but our big companies can certainly last longer. But our small and medium-sized companies that do, because of the profit margin gain from less expensive goods manufactured in China, they're going to be hurt by this.
This is why he's got to rally the entire world, right? This is why it's got to be the world versus China. We're going to get a better trade deal than we have now with the country that abuses their trade the most of anybody in the world. And if we can rally our allies,
Ophira, you're nodding. You want to jump in? Jump in.
I'm hearing a lot of ifs and buts and coulds, and that's all well and good. But I think what people want to see is action. And that's not what Trump and Republicans are taking. They're creating a lot of, like you said, chaos and uncertainty. And it's people on Main Street who are really caught in the balance here. If you're trying to start a small business right now and you don't have the certainty of whether you'll be able to get the goods that you need at a fair market rate to be able to put your business forward, I think that's a really big question mark in people's lives. And whether you're able to go to the grocery store again and be able to get more with the money that you have is a real big question mark for people. And it goes directly in contrast to what Trump promised he would do on day one, which is lower costs for people. And I think people won't forget that.
2 governor's races coming up later this fall, Virginia, New Jersey. Which is more important?
They're equally important, Major, but we're really excited to make sure to keep New Jersey blue and that we're going to flip Virginia this year. I think we've got a really exciting opportunity to elect a 9th woman Democratic governor in this country, which would be historic for us in Abigail
First
Spanberger.
in the Commonwealth of Virginia, either way.
Either way, making history, and I think we're really excited about Abigail Spanberger. We've got our general election matchup, and I think we're really, really eager to make the case for why we should
Republican
flip that
candidate
state.
there, though.
Go ahead.
Winsome Sears, African-American, excellent lieutenant governor. I think military veteran. I think she's got a real shot.
And is
With
Virginia
Youngkin
or
as the-
New Jersey a better prism into the midterms in 2026?
Well, if Democrats lose in New Jersey, then they've got real problems. We came close before, but Virginia's probably a little easier to win than New Jersey.
I think the lieutenant governor's got some real baggage. Just the other day, she said these tariffs are good and benefit the Commonwealth. She's also not been a real defender in terms of Virginia jobs. She's really saying that these layoffs that impact Virginia's economy are great for the Commonwealth. I think folks in Virginia who work federal job and are maybe being laid off by Doge and Elon Musk wouldn't agree with her. So I think we've got a real good case to make on the economy and the direction the Commonwealth goes forward.
It's already heating up, folks. You can feel it right here at the table. Ophira Yehezkel, Kevin Sheridan, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Breaking down trade barriers in the face of the president's reciprocal tariffs, Finland looks to negotiate. Next, we'll speak to the Finnish foreign minister about trade talks in Washington, NATO, Ukraine, Russia, all of that. Coming up next, right here on America Decides. This is America Decides. I'm glad you're still here. Finland's Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen is in Washington today. This afternoon, she met with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Prior to that, guess what? She sat down with me to discuss the state of the relationship between the United States and Finland. I might ordinarily put together a long question, but right now it just feels like one word will get us started. So let me just start with one word: tariffs.
Well, you see, I think the pause that President Trump introduced yesterday was fantastic news. And I think we should really grasp this opportunity to, especially between friends and allies in the transatlantic community, between Europe and the United States, now approach negotiations together, sit down and see whether we could even find a solution which is better than where we started off with. So essentially reduce trade barriers on both sides of the Atlantic, because I think that's what we need. More market economy, which will allow our people to be more prosperous, and then we can also defend ourselves against the threats of this world.
And do you think that flows through the European Union or each individual European country?
The European Union is responsible for the trade policy of all of the member states. At the same time, not all European countries belong to the European Union. But I'm sure that with the European Union, there can be a very good solution found. And we could even, I think, move towards forming a single market within the alliance between ourselves, because that will benefit the people on both sides of the Atlantic.
When you hear the administration talk, as it frequently does, not just about tariff rates, but non-tariff barriers, things like value-added taxes and the like, which are embedded into many of the legislative packages within many European countries, does that make it more complicated to resolve?
Well, you see, I think we should now really use this opportunity to sit down and also look at those different non-trade barriers to trade, because there are on both sides of the Atlantic, many of those, because there's a lot of regulation. And I think as the European Union, of course, I can speak only for us Europeans in this regard, we've gone a little bit too far in what comes to regulation, but that doesn't only harm Americans. It first and foremost harms us Europeans. And that's what we've experienced in the past 10 to 15 years. Europe hasn't grown as much as the United States. And now the new European Commission has set a goal to itself to get rid of red tape and reduce regulation. And I think here we can use the valuable insights we get with our closest trading partner, which is the United States, and make room for business, make room for the wealth of our people.
I'm going to give you another word: NATO.
NATO, I think, is the strongest it's ever been.
Really?
It is, because since President Trump was in office the last time, the European Union or European member states of NATO have doubled their expenditure.
Military budgets.
Exactly, their defense expenditure, and we have only started. Finland certainly has always invested very heavily into its own defense. We now just published a plan to put 3% of our GDP into our defense, and that doesn't even include our conscription-based army.
Are you nervous about this administration's commitment to NATO?
I'm actually not nervous at all, because I think Europe has to do more. Europe is doing more. In the next 5 years, we will have implemented a massive strategy which will benefit the transatlantic link. And we are doing this not just because of Europe, but because that's what is needed to be a strong partner also to the United States. And I'm sure that will be greatly appreciated. We just had the NATO foreign ministerial meeting last week in Brussels, and Secretary Rubio was around as well, and he assured the US commitment to NATO. But together, because the threat assessment we have as the alliance, it's not just Russia. It is also those countries partnering closely with Russia, which is China, North Korea, Iran. Together, we just have to be stronger, and I think we're on the right path now.
Being on that point, let me go from one word to two words: Russia, Ukraine.
Yes, I think President Trump, who wants to have peace in Ukraine, he's exactly right. But I think first and foremost, we should have as our aim to keep Russia at bay, because if we are able to keep Russia at bay...
What does that mean?
That means that we are able to really take care of our own defense and deterrence in the alliance, and also help Ukraine, because Russia only understands power. And if we are able to do that, then I'm sure there will be also credible and lasting peace. Because unfortunately, the threat that Russia is posing does not start or end in Ukraine, but it's posing that towards the rest of the freedom of the world. So what we need to do is understand that Russia's threat is there to stay. And now the best thing to do is threefold. Help Ukraine defend itself, and they have done a tremendous job in the past 3 years. Russia has not been advancing at all, or almost at all in the past months, at severe losses. Second thing, we need to be weakening Russia through sanctions. And again, here together, the United States, Europe and Canada, we have done a fantastic job. We just have to continue on this path, because otherwise, if we let go of the sanctions, Russia will start investing all of their rubles again into military, which they are doing now also, and then we will have the threat elsewhere. And thirdly, Europe needs to do more in defense and deterrence, and hopefully, again, together with the US, and we can be victorious.
Two more words: Marco Rubio. Your meeting.
I'm meeting Marco Rubio today, and I had the chance to talk to him last week in Brussels, and we've also spoken on the phone. And I think he's doing a fantastic job and really well representing the president, and also formulating what exactly the US wants to have from Europe, because we need to have frank and direct talks between friends and allies, and that's what I'm here for.
We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Finnish Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
An American lawyer was recently detained at an airport in Michigan after returning to the States from a family vacation. He believes he was held due to his connection to pro-Palestinian protesters. We'll speak with him next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. A civil rights attorney based in Michigan says he was targeted by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents because he represented a pro-Palestine protester. Amir Makled says he was detained while returning from an international family vacation for about 90 minutes at the Detroit Metro Airport, and while there, in that detention, brief though it was, pressured to turn over his cell phone. Now, in response to this accusation, the Assistant Commissioner for U.S. Customs and Border Patrol said this, and I quote, "This lawyer's accusations are blatantly false and sensationalized. Upon entering the country, he was flagged and referred to secondary inspection, a routine, lawful process that occurs daily and can apply to any traveler." It goes on to say, and I quote, "Claims that this was an attack on his profession or were politically motivated are baseless. Our officers are following the law, not agendas." Amir Makled joins me now. Amir, it's great to have you with us. Thank you. You heard that response from the administration. You're familiar with it. What's your response to that characterization?
Well, thanks for having me. I say that this is not a routine stop. When I arrived at the border crossing, the Customs and Border Patrol sent me in for secondary screening, and they used an acronym called TTRT, which standed for Tactical Terrorism Response Team. An officer came to me wearing plain clothes, refusing to identify himself, and knew about my travel history, knew about my profession, and knew about some of the recent high-profile cases I'm litigating. This wasn't a routine stop. This was a targeted stop. And the fact that they brought up my profession and they brought up the recent high-profile cases involving University of Michigan protester cases, I'm representing a student named Samantha Lewis. She's charged with a felony for resisting a police officer for the civil rights protests she engaged in on campus. These are the reasons why I believe this was a politically motivated and an intimidation tactic by the Customs and Border Patrol agents.
And Amir, as I understand it, there was a photograph. They looked at the photograph, brought you to the secondary detention space, and then started talking to you about what they knew about you. Is that true?
That's correct. They knew my travel history. They knew that I was an attorney. They knew about my my caseload, and they demanded to see my cell phone. They handed me a pamphlet, and they indicated to me that at the border, which I was familiar with this statute, at the border, the government can seize a telephone. I'm not obligated to give them the password to my phone, but I also didn't want to leave the meeting or leave the airport without my device. I knew that as an American citizen, they couldn't deny me entry into the United States, so I wasn't concerned about that. However, I was concerned about leaving without my cell phone device. Then they demanded that I unlock the phone and hand over the information. And I explained to them, you already know that I'm an attorney. You already know that I'm representing individuals, and a substantial amount of my work is going to be on my cell phone. I'm not going to hand over this device and breach my fiduciary duty to attorney-client privilege. And that puzzled this agent, which required him to go get some supervising advice. A supervisor came back maybe about 20 or 30 minutes later and handed me a legal pad. He said, why don't you write down everything that you believe could be privileged information in your cell phone? I said, this is a futile exercise. I've been an attorney for over 10 years. I've got thousands of emails, thousands of text messages, thousands of communications with clients and hundreds of files in my phone on my cloud. It's impossible for me to identify what could be a privileged communication or document in this setting. And at that point, they said, look, either we're going to take your phone or you're going to comply. I said, well, what is it that you're looking for? They said, show us the list of contacts in your phone, and then we'll allow you to have your phone back. So I acquiesced. They said, sign a document, and in this document indicate that you're agreeing that we can see your contact list and that your contact list is not a privileged information. I agreed. I wrote it down, and they went through my contact list at that point. Now, how they dumped this contact list, whether it was done through an external device or whether they manually scrolled it, I'm not sure. They took my device away from me for about 7 or 8 minutes. When they came back, they had a list of questions about individuals who were in my contact list, about 5 or 6 names. And at that point, I knew this was getting into a much deeper dive and a much more targeted investigation and line of questioning. I pushed back again. I said, look, if a contact is in my phone, that person is going to be a family member, a friend, or a client. And that's all the information you're going to get out of me.
Amir, I've got about a minute left, and I'm up against a hard break, so it's just a minute. What do you believe are the dangers in this scenario for you and attorneys like you?
I think it's a pattern of targeting. I think that this will cause a chilling effect and set a dangerous precedent. If attorneys, if journalists, if activists are being flagged and questioned at the border based on who they represent or based on what they believe, it creates a chilling effect on speech, association, and advocacy. We've seen this administration going after attorneys. I think it's important that we don't discourage people from traveling, from organizing or dissenting. We all have to follow what we have under the protections of the First Amendment.
And very quickly, your family was allowed to go through. You alone were detained.
Yes, me alone. I was alone detained, which made me feel a lot better because when the kids were gone, I can deal with the government confrontation. I do this for a living. I don't have a problem talking to law enforcement.
Amir Macklin, I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.